God's sake, we bend more rules than the Catholic Church.
That's Johnny Sack, and the way he says it tells you everything about who this man is before the show has ever really even started. Because Johnny Sack isn't making a joke, he's making a distinction. There's a version of this world where rules are suggestions, where loyalty is negotiable, where everything is adjustable based on who's in the room and what they need to hear. Tony Soprano lives in that version. He's built an entire career out of it. Johnny Sack doesn't live there. Johnny operates like the rules have always existed, and his job is simply to decide what follows when someone breaks them. Not to negotiate, not to recalibrate, but to apply. And for most of his time on The Sopranos, that quality makes him one of the most compelling figures in the whole show. The only man in either family who seems to be playing the long game instead of the day-to-day. But here's the thing the show is actually asking about Johnny Sack. The qualities that made him a perfect number 2 are the exact same qualities that make him a volatile and dangerous number 1. He didn't fail because he was weak. He failed because the version of himself that worked so well in one role was completely wrong for the other. Tony Soprano runs his world through constant calibration. Every conversation is a read. Every alliance is a temperature check. Tony adjusts based on whatever the room needs to keep people tethered to him. His authority is personal. It lives in the relationship, not the rule book. And that makes it extraordinarily powerful because people don't follow Tony out of obligation. They follow him because Tony has made them feel at some level like the relationship with him is worth protecting. Also, if you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to subscribe for more. It also makes his authority fragile because relationships require maintenance. Tony is always managing, always recalibrating, always holding something together that would fall apart without the constant attention. Johnny doesn't do any of that. Johnny's authority doesn't live in the relationship, it lives in the structure. He doesn't try to win the room over, doesn't adjust his tone to make people comfortable, doesn't bend the moment to fit the person. He walks into situations with a settled sense of what the rules are and what they require, and his job, as he sees it, is just to apply them. That's a completely different kind of power. Less personal, but in a lot of ways, cleaner. And what makes Johnny genuinely fascinating in the early seasons is that beneath the stoicism, there's a tactician. He's not just following the rules, he's using them. Watch how he handles Paulie. Johnny plays Paulie like an instrument. Flattery, carefully placed. Attention, offered at the right moments. He gets Paulie talking, gets him comfortable, gets real intelligence out of him about Tony's operation, all while Paulie thinks he's just having a nice conversation with the guy from New York who actually respects him. That's not a rigid enforcer, that's a pragmatist who understands that the rules give you the most leverage when other people think you're being just friendly. Johnny Sack isn't cold, he's precise. There's a difference. And then Ralph makes a joke about Ginny's weight at a party. On paper, this is nothing. A tasteless comment at a social gathering. The kind of thing that gets filed away may be addressed quietly later, or maybe just absorbed and forgotten. Tony treats it exactly that way. It costs money and creates unnecessary chaos at a time when the last thing anyone needs is unnecessary chaos. Johnny cannot move on, and this is the scene where the show first shows you the philosophical gap between these two men. Tony treats the mob as a continuous negotiation. Everything is adjustable. Slights get reframed, problems get managed. The goal is to keep the machine running, and if that means tolerating some things that technically shouldn't be tolerated, well, that's the cost of keeping everything moving. Johnny treats it as a standing arrangement, one where the terms are fixed, and tolerating decay isn't a management decision. It's a contamination of the structure itself. Let one thing slide, and you've signaled that things can slide, and once that signal is out there, you can't take it back. So from Tony's perspective, Johnny is dangerously overreacting to something trivial, and from Johnny's perspective, Tony is dangerously comfortable with something that isn't trivial at all. Both of them are right about each other, but the Ginny incident isn't just about philosophy, it's also about marriage. Tony loves Carmela, that's real, but the love exists alongside resentment, guilt, and leverage. Carmela represents expectations Tony can't quite meet and won't quite admit to. Their relationship is its own continuous negotiation. She knows what he does. He knows she knows. They've both made accommodations that neither of them is fully comfortable with. It's a complicated, genuine, slightly transactional bond. Johnny's relationship with Ginny is different kind. Not necessarily deeper, but steadier, less performative. Ginny isn't a source of guilt for Johnny. She's the fixed point his entire life is organized around. The one thing that isn't adjustable. Which is why the joke about her weight can't be handled the way Tony handles things. There's no negotiation available. Some things are outside the continuous adjustment. And for Johnny, Ginny is one of them. Tony can't fully understand that, not because he doesn't love Carmela, but because for Tony, love has always been something that exists inside the negotiation position, not outside of it. For most of the show's middle run, Johnny holds it together. He manages New York's interest in New Jersey with patience. He maintains his position as a trusted bridge between the two families without burning anything down. He keeps his own counsel, picks his moments, doesn't let the frustration show. And then Carmine Sr. starts to decline, and for the first time, you see cracks in the smooth surface. The coup attempt against Carmine is where Johnny stops being a diplomat and starts being something else. He screams at Tony, genuinely screams, which for a man who has spent years being the calmest person in every room is the tell. The composure breaks because the stakes have finally become personal in a way that they weren't before. Johnny wants the throne, has always wanted it, and the idea that it might not happen, that Carmine's heirs might inherit what Johnny has spent years building the architecture for, is the one thing he can't absorb. This is new Johnny, or more accurately, it's the Johnny that was always underneath the diplomat. Carmine dies, and then the mask comes off completely. Johnny doesn't transition gradually into aggressor, he pivots, abandons the careful strategic positioning almost immediately, and makes his first direct moves against little Carmine. A boat gets sunk. The message is sent without much patience for subtlety or building towards it over time, and Tony notices. This isn't the Johnny Sack I know, which is exactly right, because the Johnny Sack Tony knew was a number 2 who had mastered the art of pressure without direct confrontation. The Johnny Sack currently running the Luparzi family has stopped caring about the art. He has the power now, and he's going to use it, and anyone who creates a problem is going to find out what happens when problems get created. The role of boss, it turns out, narrows him. The discipline that made him exceptional in a supporting position becomes something more brittle when there's no one above him to balance against. As a number 2, Johnny's rigidity was held in check by the structure of having a number 1. As the number 1, the rigidity has nothing to check it. He becomes more isolated, more aggressive, less able to absorb the things that any boss has to absorb just to keep an organization running. Johnny Sack as boss is trigger happy in a way that surprises even the people who knew him best. Tony isn't the only one who notices. People in his own family notice. The tension he generates bleeds across into Jersey in ways that create problems Tony has to manage on his end. The man who was once the most reliable source of stability in the New York-New Jersey relationship is now the primary source of instability. And here's what's interesting about it. Johnny isn't stupid. He knows something has shifted. He can feel the way the role is sitting wrong in him. The way the decisions that should feel clean are creating friction. The way the authority he spent so long building toward isn't delivering the clarity he expected it to. But he can't adjust. That's the tragedy of it. The very quality that made him valuable is now the thing that makes him a bad boss, because the boss has to let something slide. The organization is too big. The personalities too various. The day-to-day too full of compromises for any leader to apply rigid consequences to everything. Tony has always understood this. Johnny never could. Tony warns him about the heat, about the war drawing attention, creating exposure, making everyone vulnerable. The practical argument is real, and Johnny knows it's real. And then comes the arrest. And here, right at the end of everything, Johnny Sack does something Tony Soprano could never do. He accepts the consequences. When it becomes clear that fighting the charges is going to drag Ginny through years of spectacle, Johnny makes a choice. He pleads guilty. He admits the existence of the mafia on the record, not because he's weak and not because he's broke, but because Ginny is the fixed point, the one thing that isn't subject to the continuous negotiation, and protecting her from the prolonged spectacle of a trial is worth more than protecting his status, his reputation, or his remaining time as a free man. It's the most consistent thing he does in the entire show. The same logic that made him react the way he did to the joke at the party is the same logic that makes him take the plea. Some things are outside the adjustable zone. Ginny has always been one of them. Tony would never make that choice. Tony has spent his whole life keeping his options open, keeping everything renegotiable, never fully accepting the cause and effect of what he is and what he does. Even at his lowest points, Tony is still recalibrating, still looking for the version of the story where he comes out with something. Johnny Sack later dies in prison. At his daughter's wedding, briefly released on compassionate grounds, he collapses in the parking lot. It's quiet, almost undramatic for a show that tends to dramatize its deaths. And in that moment, the show gives you its final statement on Johnny Sack. He knew exactly who he was. He knew what he chose and what it cost. He made the choice about Ginny with open eyes, and he lived with the consequences. Tony Soprano lives on. Surrounded by versions of himself, he keeps rearranging, still calibrating, still reframing, still managing the gap between what he is and what he tells himself he is. The show ends without Tony ever fully accepting the cause and effect of his own existence. Johnny was a better number 2 than Tony, maybe one of the best the show ever depicts in that role. As a number 1, he was wrong. The rigidity that works worked so well when someone above him absorbed their organizational chaos, became the source of chaos itself when nothing was above him. He wasn't built for the ambiguity the top position requires. He needed the structure too much to be the structure. And the thing the show keeps returning to in its final assessment of him is this: Johnny Sack's downfall wasn't rage, it wasn't ego exactly, it was the application of a correct value system to a world that had always been too messy and too human to sustain in it. He was right about the rules, he was just wrong about the world he was trying to apply them to.